I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve either. I'm asking you to listen. Hold this with me for 30 minutes. Let the town sleep while I say the things I've kept under my breath for years. It started the night they pulled her from the river. The first story everyone told was simple and clean. She walked out alone. She left a note. There were witnesses who said she seemed tired, resigned, like a candle burned low. They wrapped her name in neat words that meant nothing to me. Suicide, they said. Tragic, they said. I learned how to make tragedy sound acceptable, how to tie it in a bow and hand it back to people who wanted their world to make sense. But that's not what happened.
Start at the
Not
beginning,
exactly.
because you deserve the whole crooked line. Her name was Leela. She laughed with her entire face. Mouth, eyes, hands all working at once. She used to paint little suns on the margins of receipts. She kept our bills in a shoebox under the bed and would cross them out in pencil, as if crossing out debt could erase it. We weren't rich, far from it. Venues where we could afford coffee, second-hand records, cigarettes shared under flickering porch lights. We had small things that felt big because we had each other. Then the loans happened. We thought one quick payday would fix things. Rent for 3 months, a repair on the car, enough to breathe. But money is a hungry animal. We fed it with desperate choices. I started gambling, small at first, then stupid, thinking I'd win it back. Leela found out. We fought. I called it stress. She called it what it was, betrayal. That night we argued by the river. She wanted to leave, to go to her mother's. I begged. I lied. I asked. I grabbed. For a moment, a heartbeat, I held her wrist to make her stay. I didn't mean it to be violent. I just wanted her to hear me, to not walk away when everything felt like it would collapse.
She lost footing on the slick bank. She fell into the black water. I remember her hands, how small they felt when they slid from mine. I remember reaching and getting only cold air. I said her name. The river answered with a sound like paper tearing. We told ourselves stories after to survive. I told myself she had chosen it. I told myself I wasn't to blame. Leela's face in my dreams read like a question mark I had no answer to. So I learned how to carry silence. I took the night job at Greywood Cemetery because it paid cash and no one asked too many questions. Midnight till sunrise. The town's outskirts breathe different at night. Flat, indifferent, made of long shadows and crickets. People think cemeteries are quiet. They aren't. Quiet is an honest absence. Greywood hums. It has voices of its own. The scrape of roots under stone, the sigh of pines, and sometimes a far-off, mournful animal that might be a fox might be a metal gate moving on its rust. My shift is a slow loop. Check the perimeter, patrol the mausoleums, make sure the gates are locked, sit in the little shed with a kettle on the hot plate, watch the monitors so I can say I did my job. It was supposed to keep me from falling into myself. It made sense at first. Clean,
But grief
practical.
is not practical. It's a leak you ignore until the floor rots. The first thing I noticed was the perfume. Not the cheap cologne I'd bought on a whim months ago, but Leela's perfume, orange blossom. It has a sweetness that hits like memory. I'd be leaning against the shed door, exhausted, staring at the grain of wood, and a wind would bring something soft and floral, and suddenly the room would tilt. I'd taste river water in my mouth. I'd close my eyes and imagine her silhouette moving between headstones. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Night shifts twist sleep into dreams and make your hearing traitorous. But the scent found me too often for coincidence. It sat on the back of my neck when I walked between graves. It threaded through the air conditioning duct of the shed. Sometimes I would swear I could make out a laugh, the sound she used when she was half mischief and half sympathy.
On the second
Then
week,
came
a
the
lamp
lights.
by the family mausoleum flickered in a way machines don't flicker. It pulsed like a lung with something breathing. I walked over, flashlight in hand, because habit is a kind of bravery. There was nothing there. No wiring frayed, no bulb blown. When I turned back, the bulb's light had steadied, but across from it, a stone I'd known since my first week seemed to have frost on the carving, like moonlight frozen into letters. I go back and look at that stone a dozen times in the weeks after. Sometimes the letters were sharp, sometimes the edges rounded like something had softened them. Then I saw the camera footage. We have a string of old CCTV monitors in the shed, 4 grainy squares that show the gate, the lane, the old oak, the main courtyard. One night, scrolling through, I watched the feed on the one that faced the river. There she was, standing on the bank where she'd fallen. I froze the tape. Her hair clung in dark ropes. Her dress hung in sullen sheets. She wasn't looking at the water. She was looking out toward the cemetery. For a moment, the screen was only her silhouette against the black. Then she turned her head slightly, and it felt like the camera and I had agreed to look away the same instant.
The footage was a smear, a trick. Glitches happen. But the next night, the same image appeared on the same monitor. And the night after that, she stood there, and day by day, the tape showed her standing further from the bank, as if the river itself were handing her back to the land, inch by inch. The nights after I saw her on the monitor, I started waking with my wrists sore, not from sleep, but from being clenched so tight. On my rounds, I would find small footprints in the dust, wet, small, like someone had walked barefoot among the stones after a rain that hadn't fallen. I'd follow them, heart hammering, and they would lead to a name I knew as if someone had written it on my chest. I confronted myself like a man arguing with a mirror. You're tired, I told myself. You're haunted by guilt, that's what this is. But ghosts don't need to prove to you they're real by smelling of orange blossom. The world does not bend to guilt. That was a lie I repeated to make the night's end. One night, the gate refused to open when my relief came. I was supposed to hand off and go home. The van's driver honked. I thumbed the gate mechanism. Nothing. The engines of the town outside hummed like an annoyed insect. The van drove away, lights shrinking. I was stuck alone with the stones and a thin half-moon that looked like someone had shaved a coin to half its
I went
skin.
out along the path toward the river. The place where the town meets the water smells like mud and old promises. I remember thinking I could make some kind of bargain, say the right words, lay down the exact thing she wanted, and maybe the night would give me mercy. I called her name. The sound rolled out like a weak coin and came back changed. She was there when I reached the bank. Not alive, not dead. Something in between, as if the water had kept part of her to feed itself. Her eyes were a color I couldn't name, faded and wet and intent like a shutter closing on a camera. She stood with her toes in the water, body straight as a newly made scarecrow, and looked at me with all the weight she'd been denied in the world. "You left me," she said. It was her voice, and not. It had the place in it where a river teaches words to the people it keeps. "You left me, and now I'm making sure you can't leave anyone else." When she said that, something shifted in the trees around us. The black moved like a herd. The river answered with a sound like teeth. I backed away, and my shoe sank in muck. My hand went out and found only wet grass. I could smell the perfume so clearly then that my knees went weak. "You couldn't save me," she said, "but now I can make you watch." It was like cold fire. Her fingers were wet and clamped to my wrist like I had been the lin through which her life bled out. For days after, I had a mark I couldn't explain, pale lines around my skin like someone had taken a ruler and drawn where they had been. I began to see more of them on other men in town. A farmer came into the diner one morning with a similar mark on his forearm. He said nothing, just stared at his coffee like it had teeth in it. People say ghosts are our fear made solid. Maybe that's true, but Leela taught me ghosts are more organized. The river had a way of keeping score. I started seeing other shapes in the water's edge, slim forms, faces that were more suggestion than full picture. They would wait in the shallows as if they'd learned to be patient. One I recognized from the cedar plots, an old man who used to fish off the bridge. Another was the woman who ran the bakery and whose glazed hands had once handed me change. Their mouths were small pinpricks. Their eyes were blank like a basement window covered in frost. They didn't approach me, not at first. They stood at the waterline and watched like a jury. Occasionally the river would lift a limp arm and place it on a boy's shoulder or a mother's waist, as if to say, "Remember me. This is what you did." I did what anyone afraid would do. I buried it. I worked more. I kept the kettle boiling. I learned the black parts of the cameras until I could see movement before it was really there. I told myself what I told others, rational explanations, wind, rodents, faulty wiring. The brain loves tidy answers. It will stitch you an excuse faster than you can breathe.
The voice that beat the cameras wasn't coming from the shed monitors. It came from the ground. One night, as rain leaned sideways, I walked the path around the oldest section. There's a plot there so old the stones are tips of shells. The family who owns it has no living branch in town. The billboards call them pioneers. I had been walking to clear the syrup of dread that sits in the chest at 2 a.m. when I heard laughing. Not loud, the sort of small laugh you stifle with your hand when you don't want to make anything real. It sounded like Lila. I turned. The laugh painted the air like a splinter. There she was, standing on the other side of a small mound, wet hair slumped, hands folded like she was waiting to be judged. But this time there was another person with her, a shadow among shadows. At first I thought it was a trick of the rain. Then I watched, and the ghost, if that's what she was, reached out and placed her hand on the shadow's arm. The shadow's outline wavered. It uncurled like fabric in the wind. My boots sank in mud. The sound of my own heart hammered an order in my ears. The closer I got, the more the shadow solidified, until I could see it was not just a shadow, but an imprint, a pattern of someone's movements, a human smudged into the world. "You kept it safe," Lila said to the imprint. My knees gave out. I remember falling into wet grass and the cold crawling into me. The imprint, the thing she touched, shifted like a pool of oil might, and part of it slid into the shape of my hands when I had grabbed her by the wrist on that bank. A memory made of motion. The world was being made to show me what I had done. "You left me," then, the ghost out said. Loud, because somewhere inside me, the part that wanted to be honest, if only to be found out, woke up. I told myself I would be brave and tell the truth, and maybe the night would be satisfied and we could both stop pretending. "I didn't mean to," I said. The words came soft, like a child apologizing to a vase. Her mouth twitched, and it looked like a smile at first, but it was not. "You pushed me," she repeated. "You left me. You let the river keep me." It was not an accusation directed only at me. It was an instruction. Around her, the other shapes in the water leaned forward. The air tasted like coins and the underside of tin roofs during storms. "They need company," she said. "They get lonely there. They get forgotten. They want attention." Her voice softened. "So I keep them company. I teach them to reach." Then I heard footsteps behind me. Another kind of movement, not human. Something slid across the grass with a sound like paper over sand. The imprint behind Leela deepened. It produced a sound that was like a groan, not made by lungs, but by wood bending. I couldn't stay. I tried to get up and run. My leg went out from under me. I felt hands try to take mine. The hands were cold and wet, and I knew then that my feet had a deadline, and the grave had set the hours. I scrambled, and in my scramble I did the only thing my terror made me do. I lashed out. I remember grasping at the thing that would stand in the future
and ripped the grace from it. I cannot keep from saying it, so I will say it now. My hands were not clean that night. I thought I was fighting a theft. I thought I was pushing away something that would take from me. But the thing I struck was not the river. It was a memory. And when memory falls, it splatters truth like water. For weeks after, someone in town whispered that I had been seen at odd hours. A neighbor said my face looked like a mask pulled too tight. People give ghosts room to breathe, but not room to live in their skin. Rumors are compassionate things. They wrap horror in a paper bag so children
appearances got more insistent. She started to follow the path I walked from shed to gate, not by form, but by effect. When I walked between row after row, the air would chill behind me. The ground beneath my feet would give as if someone had pressed a thumb on an old bruise. On one terrifying night, the names on a row of freshly cleaned stones rearranged themselves to spell out words I could not unsee. They spelled remember. I tried to leave town. I packed one night while the kettle cooled and the shed was empty. I drove until the sky shifted and the town was a smear behind me. But in the rear view, a shape the size of Lila's silhouette stood on the bridge like a customs officer of grief, and when I blinked, she was gone. After that, the only time I ever left my chest felt like a vault being locked. The townspeople changed subtly. They walked as a herd might if one member was limping. Conversations dulled at the edges. The bakery closed early some nights because the baker said the dough wouldn't rise. The farmer didn't bring his fish to market for a week. People avoided the river in ways that felt obvious only to those of us who carried water in our skin.
Which is to say, a man in a respectable jacket and a pile of pamphlets that smiled with the kind of hope only printed ink can muster. He asked if I wanted to confess. I told him no. He sat in the shed that night, under the light, and read aloud from a book that smelled like other people's sin and called it absolution. I listened. When the words ended, he asked if I believed in souls. I told him the river did. He left at dawn as if the whole night had been a rehearsal. I kept his pamphlets in a drawer as a superstition. I kept them because I wanted to remember how ordinary things tried to fix extraordinary crime. If this sounds like an escalation of theatrics, it is because that is what grief does. It dresses itself for an audience. The river wanted me to confess properly. It wanted me to lift the words and lay them inside someone else's hands and let them carry the weight the way I never could. On a night when the moon had the shape of a cruel grin, Leela stood at the shed door. She did not knock. The hinges did nothing at all. She was already inside, in the thin smell of steam and the grain of the wood. She watched me eat a stale sandwich like a man at trial watches a guilty witness.
"I can't," I said. The words were small. They felt like bad currency. "You can," she said. "You can or you will. The river has a way of collecting debt." And it did. People started to die in ways that looked like accidents. Car brakes failing, a ladder snapping, an old house giving way. Each death had a small indentation, like a fingerprint pressed into wet clay. For a while I thought my guilt had made me a magnet for tragedy. But then one night I watched from the shed as a figure walked toward the bridge and someone shrugged off a life like a coat. The river took intercepting forms that looked like mercy, but were only doors. I stopped sleeping. I stopped talking. I stopped trying to buy back hours with cash I didn't have. The town moved around me like a cart without a wheel. And then came the night she asked me to do something I had never considered possible. She asked me to save someone. She wanted me to pull someone back from the water the way I had watched her fall without diving in. The idea was monstrous and raw. The person was a woman, a stranger, who had been seen walking the bridge in a pale coat. Leela said if I saved her, the river's appetite would shrink a little. If I refused, it would eat more.
Because I could not bear the thought of saying no. The place smelled like the underside of metal. I stood where the lamplight fell and watched the water blacken rocks like teeth. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the woman appeared, so young it hurt to look at, standing on the railing like a bird about to learn it couldn't fly. I stepped forward. I shouted. I reached. My hands were ready. She turned slowly and looked at me with the face of someone who had made peace with an old debt. For a terrible second, I saw Lila reflected in her eyes, as if the river had a way of painting the same face on anyone near its jaws. The woman smiled, and in that smile I saw all the little things I'd done wrong. I reached and grabbed her wrist. She was easy to get. Her body was light up to a point, like a puppet person who deferred its weight to the flow. I pulled. The railing dug into my hands. For a second, I thought I could save her. I thought I might be able to redeem myself by saving someone else. Then a hand, cold and wet, closed on my ankle. Lila's hand. It held me like a vice. "Not yet," she said. Every horror story has a threshold where your choices narrow. That night was mine. The woman, she who might have been a stranger or a reflection, slipped free. She stepped off the bridge, not into darkness, but into something that blinked like a light. I watched her fall like one watches fuel spill and ignite. The river accepted her like a hungry guest.
And for the first time in all the nights, she looked like a judge more than a lover. "You can't choose someone else's life for them," she said. "You can only be honest with what you've taken." And then, softer, "Tell them, or they will tell you." I did not want to talk.
Spilling what I had done felt like opening a vein and offering my pulse to the world. But the river is patient. It teaches in slow lessons. People in town started coming to me with things that mattered. A lost locket, a reckoning, someone they'd kept in a trunk in the attic. In exchange, it wanted confession. It was not satisfied with cash or apologies. It wanted me to name the exact thing I had done and tie it with my signature. So I told the police an altered version. I recited a version that kept the awful parts at a distance. I cried the way accused people cry, not entirely from the remorse, but because it's what the law expects, hot, timed, performative. They closed the case as an accident. People shook my hand and said, "Time heals." The river whispered into my skull like a tape left to play overnight. It told me the truth had weight, and that I was a ledger with pages still unturned. On the last night I worked at Greywood, I knew the river would not be satisfied until it took more than stories. I sat on the bench by Lila's grave and let my knees fold under me. Rain began to fall like someone airing laundry. From the shed, the monitors blinked with indifferent phosphor. I watched my own face reflected in the glass. I thought of how easy it had been to let go of her on that bank. I thought of all the small dishonesties that had led there, the lies about money, the games, the one time I laughed at something that should have been
in the rain, like she'd been waiting at a station. Her dress clung, her hair spilled like river ink. She sat beside me without the squeak of a bench under her. She said, "I forgive you." It was the most ordinary thing she could have said, and so it was monstrous. Forgiveness was a promise and a trap. In the same breath she said, "But forgiveness doesn't erase what you owe the living." I asked her once, as if practice could make me feel lighter, what would happen if I told the truth publicly, if I took my confession to the square, to the judge, to the church. Who would it drag down? She smiled then, in a way that was an explanation. "The river doesn't want to punish you for what you did," she said. "It wants to show you what other hands do when they think themselves alone. It wants to hold you while you learn how to be the kind of person who doesn't make someone's last sight be your hands." I stood up. I don't know what came over me, shame or love or a sudden hunger for sunlight. I walked to the gate and unlocked it. I went into town and I told them everything. I said it out loud, with my voice breaking and with the kind of details that make a confession stick. People look at confessions like weights. Some think they see a person lifted. Others see a body thrown off a cliff. I saw faces with the soft look of pity and then the harder look of a community deciding what to do. They arrested me. They called my story an admission. They put me in a room with a thin mattress and a light that hummed like an insect that wouldn't die. While I sat waiting, I thought perhaps the river would be sated. Perhaps the confession would buy me silence. At night, while the jail slept and the pipes hummed, I heard a sound like 100 small feet at the water's edge. Lila's voice was clear as a bell. "You did the hard part," she said. "You told them. Now
You must do the rest. The rest was something the law could not sentence me for. The rest was what you pay when the things you've broken are living people who must breathe again. I had to accept that my confession did not bring back the dead. It only gave the living permission to look at me with more than superstition. When they released me, the town had shifted. You could feel the margin between people, where loyalty frayed and where fear sat. I returned to Greywood because it had always been the place where grief was most visible. It felt wrong to leave the stage half cleared, and the river waited with patience like a ledger. It did not demand my life in exchange. It demanded my attention. It wanted me present when the living remembered the river was not a place to be toyed with. It wanted me to be the one who would tell the truth to the ones who were tempted to lie. Some nights Lila is kinder than others. Sometimes she helps me find a watch lost in the grass. Once she stopped a falling tombstone from rolling down a slope toward a child who had strayed too close. The river taught me that holding someone sometimes means standing between them and your own horror. But it also has its rules. When she is like this, close and almost tender, it is because I have done something that slowed it. When she is far and watching, you feel it like a hand on your shoulder that won't let you forget. The truth is a living thing in Greywood. It pushes in like undercurrent, coaxing a confession until you offer more than words. And so here I am, telling you everything, because telling it into your ears might be the last safe place for honesty. Maybe you will hear me and pity me. Maybe you will think I deserved worse. Maybe you will be the sort of person who reads a thing like this and decides to cross the bridge faster at night.
After all the years, I still sometimes wake to the smell of orange blossom. I still find wet footprints beside my own in the shed in the morning. I still clutch the steering wheel with knuckles white enough to hurt when I cross the bridge. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I see Leela in the passenger seat, hair damp and eyes like a river at dusk, and she leans over and says, "Don't forget them."